very embarrassed after the latest revelations on the extent of NSA spying around the world. The American intelligence agency going far beyond the scope of counterterrorism, collecting data on political leaders, businesses. Now, before I go back to our guests, let's bring in James Creedon, who's been doing some information gathering of his own. Hey, James.
Evening, Cyril.
What does the internet and social media have to say about this?
Well, a lot of them picking up on the French media reaction, a certain degree of, I suppose, cynicism about the measured response of Paris. Take a look at this article in Le Parisien, Cyril. Paris gets angry, but not too much. Paris se fâche, mais pas trop. And they go on to describe Fabius, the French foreign minister's discussions with John Kerry yesterday, as very gentlemanly. And a sort of a bittersweet anger being expressed, very measured indeed, says Le Parisien. Moving on to Le Monde, of course, behind this big revelation earlier this week. They are reporting today on François Hollande and how he has asked for a bilateral cooperation in intelligence gathering with the US. Now, when a journalist asked the government spokeswoman about this, saying, well, shouldn't this activity be neutralised instead of it, some sort of cooperation going ahead? Her response was yes, but, the fight against terrorism, etc., etc. So a lot of people, I think, maybe a bit cynical about François Hollande doing a turnaround on that, actually, because if you go back to July, he said all of this activity must stop. And now he's saying we need to share this activity. Anyway, moving on to Europe, because that's, I suppose, where a lot of this is now going to be played out in terms of the way forward or a backlash from Europe. Another piece of reporting from Le Monde saying that the European Council meeting later this week is going to be looking at this. Data collection is going to be on the agenda. And the Justice Commissioner is looking for a very strong response. She said on this matter, Viviane Reding, data protection isn't a concept, it's a fundamental right and it needs a fundamental law underpinning it. And indeed, the European Parliament could be where a lot of this will play out as well, with data transfer accords such as the SWIFT Accord, that's an agreement between the US and the EU, perhaps being cancelled, and fines of up to 100 million being placed on companies that transfer this data to outside of the EU.
And Le Monde continues to look at divisions in Europe over the response to this NSA espionage.
That's right. I mean, that's interesting, in fact, because apparently, if you go back to earlier this summer, François Hollande, according to Le Monde, didn't want free trade agreements between the EU and the US to go ahead. He was hoping for a suspension of those talks, pending some sort of clarity or clarification of these NSA spying revelations. Apparently, David Cameron and Angela Merkel wanted those free trade talks to go ahead, and so they went ahead. So that's an interesting piece of information that Le Monde underlined today. Another interesting piece of information coming out is how the NSA has chosen to respond to this, saying, look, you're talking about 70 million French calls being recorded. Collected is the term that the NSA is actually contesting. They say we didn't collect 70 million phone calls. Well, if I think it's this article, the previous one I was looking at there in TheVerge.com, they say previously the head of the NSA has said, well, I have a different definition of collection to other people. So I think what we're getting down to here is semantics. They say
Sounds
70
like
million.
Somebody's playing on words.
Absolutely. And NPR in the US have also been looking into this too. The NSA has often defended these practices by saying, look, it's the fight against terrorism. 54 attacks have been thwarted thanks to NSA intelligence gathering. But in fact, none of that information can be verified. It has been handed over to Congress, but it's classified. And the NSA won't respond to requests from NPR, National Public Radio in the US, or other media when they ask for clarification on those terrorist attacks that were thwarted. So it's veiled in a cloak of secrecy.
And so NSA clearly saying Le Monde not a very reliable source.
Yes, essentially, and questioning the data that they have published.
But Le Monde hit right back with its own publishing the actual document that they got that was leaked from the NSA source material.
That's right. So I think it's a bit of a back and forth between the two at the moment. Just finished with two cartoons, Cyril. This is by Algerian cartoonist when the US ambassador was summoned by Laurent Fabius. I imagine you already know why you're here, seeing as all of the information has been shared. And I think this one, which is underlining a frequent criticism, the fact that, the French aren't completely innocent when it comes to matters of espionage. So there's Uncle Sam listening to the typical Frenchie who's listening to Uncle Sam.
All right, James Creedon with Media Watch, thank you very much. And let's get back to, thanks a lot, James. Let's get back to part two of the debate. In part one, we've been discussing what you can essentially do, what the rest of the world can do about the fact that the NSA is spying so extensively and on so many different levels, both in Europe, in Mexico, in Brazil, in Germany, other parts of the world. Now, the question we're going to be asking in the second part of the debate is, what do we know about other countries carrying out similar programs? All right, Frédéric Douzet holds the Castex Chair of Cyber Strategy at the French Institute of Higher National Defense Studies. David Nakache is professor here at Paris 2 and member of the Computer Science Department of the École Nationale Supérieure. Jean-Pierre Larochelle is a political commentator and analyst, best known to his internet fans as Euro Maestro. And from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, Jean-Philippe Albrecht, member of the European Parliament and the Green Party. Thank you all for being with us here on France 24. Right before we get to the rest of the world and who else is undertaking these activities, I'd like to develop something we couldn't get to in part one of the debate, which is what kind of information, apart from the counterterrorism the NSA is looking for. It seems that economic information, intelligence gathering, is a very big part of this.
Yeah, it is indeed. Economic, scientific as well. There is a lot of academic research going on. Hackers exchanging information when they try to break into systems, find new exploits, and this is very valuable. So it's a sort of snowball effect. Basically, once you can listen to people, you can know what scientific advances they have, and with those scientific advances, you can further advance your own knowledge by leveraging on that. So it's a quite a pervert game.
Apparently, the NSA was particularly interested in several French high-tech companies. Wanadoo, the internet provider, Alcatel-Lucent, the Franco-American Alto Telecoms company. They're working in a particularly sensitive area because they're actually responsible for some of the underwater cables that are laid that carry the digital information. Are we talking about economic warfare in terms of getting information that will secure contracts for one country or one company as opposed to another?
Well, I think the NSA is trying to get as much data as it can. Now, what it does with it is completely unclear, but definitely, whether it is technological data, whether it is political, whether it is defense, whatever it is, it's the same techniques that they can use in order to get a strategic advantage, whatever the field. Now, what's interesting is the NSA is claiming that it is collecting data only for the purpose of counterterrorism and security. And they're actually accusing the Chinese to collect data for economic warfare reasons. And according to them, that's the cutting line. That's the major difference between what they're doing and what other people are doing. And what they're actually saying is really, we're the good guys and you should trust us to do the right thing. Now, the problem we have now is we know they're not doing the right thing. So what do we put in place to make sure that they're actually doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite clear that the counterterrorism explanation is a pretext because the sheer size and scale of the surveillance is way beyond any type of counterterrorism efforts, okay, because we know the sheer tens of millions of calls in 1 month just in France, and this is going on worldwide. We also know about the various economic surveillance that's taken place in the Brazilian petrochemical companies, for instance, and we've also seen that they have been spying on the French embassies at the United Nations and embassies around the world and the European Commission embassies as well. And there's already been leaks that they've acknowledged that they use that for negotiation positions in the United Nations. So it's clearly not only for counterterrorism efforts. It's also for diplomatic advantages, political advantages, and apparently as well economic advantages.
Are there known instances, maybe not, of contracts going one way rather than another because of this information being gathered?
I don't know of any particular contracts that have gone that way, but we do know for sure that they have done surveillance of economic companies. Maybe my
No, I don't know about any specifics, and it's absolutely really hard to prove, but there are definitely suspicions about some markets that have been taken by the U.S. And for information that they were able to collect. But what's interesting is whenever the NSA is being asked about these tactics. They're saying, well, if you want us to stop giving you data that help you fight terrorism, then that's fine. We're just going to stop. And actually, if you look at what the
So that gives
government is
them
saying,
leverage.
is not we should stop, is we should frame the spying programs. It's a little different.
Jan-Philippe Albrecht in Strasbourg from the European Parliament. The U.S. has said that the spying is also going on from other countries around the world, notably China. For the moment, we've heard the European lawmakers strike out at Washington. Are you concerned that the same thing is happening with perhaps countries that have that are less friendly to Europe than the U.S.?
Of course, and I mean, we have to acknowledge that there's a majority of non-democratic, non-rule of law-based states in the world still. And so it's more than important that we stick to our values and our fundamental principles on both sides of the Atlantic. And that's exactly what we are pointing out at the moment after the Snowden revelations. Is it really the right way to obviously not stick anymore to our fundamental values, and we have to correct it before we point the finger on third states. And I think it's very important to know that, of course, there is tension, also economically tension, between the US and the EU. And if you look at Airbus and the relation to Boeing, the NSA, of course, does have a creative definition of national security. We need to get into that. We need to line out what national security means to us, and we also need to get right what are the borders for proportionate law enforcement measures. I think this was outside of the borders, and we need to react to that and get it right again. And it's the duty of parliamentarians to now point this out in Europe and in the USA.
Mr. Albrecht, we've just been getting information over the last few minutes that Angela Merkel, the German chancellor, her mobile may have been spied on as well, her cell phone. She spoke to American President Barack Obama. She called this unacceptable. So it does seem that there is a trend clearly outlined here in Europe. I mean, the same thing happening with Angela Merkel saying this is unacceptable, the French saying this is unacceptable. We're going to be very interested in what's going to be coming out of European authorities at the European Council at the end of the week. Now, the question I wanted to put to you is, you clearly have, you clearly disagree with what the U.S. is doing in terms of the spying here in Europe, but officials, observers of this issue have been saying that European countries do the same thing on their own scale, and we haven't heard the European Parliament ask various member states to curtail their own spying programs.
Oh, we have. We have invited French and British and German authorities to testify in our inquiry here in the Civil Liberties Committee, which we are doing right now. And we are looking at those measures. For example, just a few weeks ago, we had an inquiry on the attack to the Belgian telecommunications provider Belgacom by the British intelligence service GCHQ, which is obviously and mostly proven. And I just have to say that obviously, when we are taking care about cyber criminals and about cybercrime in Europe, we should look at the intelligence services in Europe. Obviously, they are one of the biggest cyber criminals here in Europe. And I'm very disappointed that until now, no EU government and no EU authorities, law enforcement authorities, have taken up this and investigate against these cyber attacks. I think we need to take care about that and bring it into the right track again. And also we have to talk about the way how we supervise the intelligence service activities inside Europe. It's not working anymore in no member state. We need a supervision on European level, and I think also we need European rules on that. Until now, as European Parliament, we don't have the competence to regulate on that. We need to change that.
By the way, I just want to share with all our guests we've been getting tweets, of course, since the beginning of the show, and we have someone tweeting that the U.S. is probably spying on France because it's a complete socialist country with a complete different policy. Just a lighter perspective on things. One of our viewers clearly feels that the difference is in politics on both sides of the Atlantic is one of the things motivating the surveillance. Not something we've heard from our guests from our panel this evening. I want to get into something else. Who else is doing this? We've heard China. I understand Russia is also one of the major players in this.
Israel.
Israel?
Yes, yes.
What are the major centers of spying around the world of electronic surveillance?
Well, if you're talking about Israel, they have an equivalent of the NSA, which is called Unit 8200, that actually does the interceptions and so on. Those guys has gone quite far because they have their own internal university where they would form people, they train people. India as well. We see countries like Romania, for instance, increasing very much in skills. Very good hackers, very good Russians as well, with the particularity of subcontracting work to a number of universities and research institutions. So everybody does a little bit of its own cooking in this field.
There's an interesting report that came out earlier this week by a company called FireEye. Now, they're particularly interested in cyber attacks and cyber protection. And this is their take on what's going on around the world in a nutshell. They say there's a cyber war going on, and there's a cyber war. Cyberspace has become a full-blown war zone as governments across the globe clash for digital supremacy. In a new, mostly invisible theater of operations, in this shadowy battlefield, victories are fought with bits instead of bullets, malware instead of militias, and botnets instead of bombs. Do you see this as, is the word cyber war, warfare, is that the right vocabulary?
Oh, absolutely. It's the right vocabulary. The United States has already indicated that that's part of their defense strategy is to concentrate more on cyber wars and digital strategy and digital defense. And I think it's a realistic understanding of how technology has changed the competitive sphere.
But just maybe one thing is cyberspace is not a natural domain. It doesn't exist without the action of human beings. And all the fight that is going on through networks is the result of geopolitical tensions and rivalries from the real world. So they're fighting, they're using networks, they're using new technologies, but basically for the same reasons that they were fighting with traditional weapons.
So do we need to invent laws of cyber warfare in the same way that there are laws of war, of regular warfare?
Well, if we're talking about personal liberties and civil liberties, there's a very fundamental difference in understanding between the U.S. conception of personal rights in terms of data protection and privacy than that exists in Europe. And this is the problem because Europe wants to enforce its understanding of rights on American companies and have the United States respect those rights.
And also, I mean, there are countries that are non-democratic regimes, and that makes a huge difference with us. And I think there is a major issue here.
This gets back to what you were saying earlier about the U.S. argument that, that the U.S. should essentially be trusted, as opposed to other countries such as China, such as Russia.
Yeah, well, that's their main argument. But as democracies, our governments are also accountable about what they're doing. And clearly here, I mean, we have clearly seen that there are issues of protection of privacy, that there's also the issue of how our tax money is being used. So having a public debate about what do we want in terms of a balance between democracy and surveillance, how do we protect our civil liberties, what kind of safeguards do we put in place, what kind of political supervision do we want? This wouldn't be a concern if we were not a democratic regime, but as a matter of fact, we are. And I think it's also in the interest of the governments because all these programs were built on the presumption that they would remain secret. But they're not going to remain secret in this new world, right? There's going to be leaks. And because so many people believe that Snowden is a hero, I think a lot of people are going to want to be heroes. So you're probably going to have more and more of these programs that are going to be leaked. So if you want to build up legitimacy, maybe it's time to have a conversation.
Building up legitimacy and setting up the legal framework for this, I understand that that's an important part of the conversation. But if we accept, and you both of you seem to accept that this is a cyber war going on, then an equally important part of the conversation is that every country will want to win the war. So perhaps just as important as building up the legal framework, I don't know what you think about this, is actually developing the tools, investing the money, the time, the resources, the know-how to be on the winning side of this war.
Yes, and we had a look, for instance, with two of my students into Flame, the worm. We reverse
Reminder of
engineered.
viewers, Flame.
Oh, Flame. Sorry, it's a worm. It's a worm. It's a computer worm. Very developed. We don't know actually who officially developed it, but it infects a machine in a very specific way. It is very advanced, and one of the things that we try to do is measure actually the advance, see what is the gap between what we know and what we do, and the designers of this thing. We estimated there are about 50 people who should have worked on the thing during a couple of years, developing ad hoc tools, developing ad hoc knowledge. Very good people, with extremely good skills. So it gives us a measure of the gap between the academics who work usually on small projects alone, and what those agencies have and what those agencies do. Again, to answer your question, I think that there are a number of small actions. There are no silver bullet, but there are a collection of small actions that should be put together if we want to contain this threat. As I said, one is to try to find ways to use in a secure way insecure infrastructures, but there's also an action that each and every citizen can do. We know what are those companies that actually collaborated with the NSA. Why don't we move massively email accounts out? Why don't we stop buying products and sanctioning in an economic way those companies who actually collaborated with the NSA? If they did so, it means that they have some economic interest. So it is just an economic game where we can change it if we just stop using their products.
And so what's the answer? What's your explanation of why we don't do that?
I don't know. Probably the average citizen doesn't really care or doesn't really think about it. But I think that as time will pass, and probably with people such as the deputy that you have been talking to lately, things will eventually evolve.
We just got a tweet which is interesting. I remember I was telling you a few minutes ago that Angela Merkel, we've just found out her cell phone may have been spied on. One of our viewers saying, now Merkel is angry because she's personally affected. Where was she when 80 million citizens were being spied on? It's true that the reaction from Germany, similar to the reaction from France, some might say, was muted until now. And now it would appear, according to those initial statements by Angela Merkel being made just a few moments ago, that she does want things to change and certainly is going to bring that issue to the European Council at the end of the week. You wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what David was saying about why don't we do that. I think the problem with the European Union is it's not as much a political body as a collection of nation states, and it's been hard enough to do defense together. So cyber defense is even more sensitive and even more difficult. And as a matter of fact, there are only a few states that are really advanced in their cyber capacities, and each of them has a special relationship to the United States and is collaborating to some degree with the U.S. intelligence services. So that makes it very difficult to agree on a common position on a number of these issues, and especially on regulation.
For the moment, the main players in this cyber war, you've all been saying, are nation states. Is there a parallel to what we've seen in terms of regular warfare developing towards guerrilla warfare? Are there groups, small groups, individuals that would have weapons cyber weapons to cause significant damage?
We're moving subjects because I don't think you can compare like the threats and trying to
that comparison
damage
just doesn't
to
exist.
just
Okay.
spying. I think these are different issues. I don't think the U.S. is interested in damaging our infrastructure. So it's.
What I'm saying is, could a country come under attack, not by another country, but by an individual or a group of individuals?
The answer is yes, but it will be ephemeral. Basically, a group of individuals would attack in a very focused way using some very focused technique, and then it would be fixed very quickly. They wouldn't be able to have a sustained attack and last for a long time. It can be some localized damage. This is the answer to your question.
All right, David Nakash, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our guests for joining us on the France 24 debate this evening. I'd also like to thank Jean-Philippe Albrecht. He was with us as well during the debate. James Bamford, who left a little while earlier. Thank you very much to all of you for watching the debate. You can watch it again on France24.com. Thanks a lot.
This week we're down to earth in the Republic of Congo, about to take you with us on board Africa Mercy. This floating hospital with a crew of 400 offers the most advanced healthcare for free to some of the poorest people in the world. And what we're about to learn is whether you're a patient or not, a walk up this gangway guarantees your life will never be quite the same.
Don't miss Down to Earth on France 24 and France24.com.
Down to Earth, brought to you by the African Development Bank.
Here in my shop, there's a lot of waste from used mobile phones and other electronic equipment, and it cannot be recycled. I would really like to find a way to make it all go away. Just like that.
In just a few seconds, this chip will self-destruct. A few drops of water is all it takes to make it disappear. And this breakthrough could soon be applied to all our old electronic devices, phones and computers.
Essentially a challenge in materials. What kind of materials can you use that are water soluble, biocompatible, environmentally benign, but still allow you to build a circuit that has a useful function?
The team uses different materials like silk, which becomes soluble in water. The result, a functional and a fully biodegradable chip.
We're not talking about unreliable, flaky electronics. We're talking about electronics that's very specifically engineered, have excellent properties, time independent, until the programmed moment at which you don't need the device anymore, and then it dissolves away. That's the trick.
It seems soon our discarded mobile phones and other electronic waste could be made disappear before our very eyes.